Pretty much no matter what, as long as you look at a different region in League of Legends, chances are the meta is different in sometimes subtle and sometimes really big ways. Today I'm going to be taking you guys down the road with me to see the new hotness on the Korean server. And today I've got 5 builds laid out for you guys, and always keep in mind that even if you don't play these champions, you're likely to be facing against them because they're probably strong right now in the meta. Knowing what they're going to take in their runes and probably what they're going to be buying in their items can really help you counter them just on its own. To find guides on these champions, you should definitely subscribe to our YouTube channel and go check out what we have already done on champion guides. And if we don't have them there, we probably have them on our website, GameLeap.com, where we have tons and tons of guides that are all done by challenger level players. If you give these builds a try or manage to even preempt the meta a little bit, how do you guys feel about these builds on these champions? Let me know in the comments. And if you're having success, make sure you hit that like button, because that way I know these builds were actually useful for you in one way or another. The first champion I'm going to dive into is Sylas, and this build in particular applies to Sylas top and Sylas mid. It does not work for Sylas jungle, just keep that in mind. Even though I did just make a Sylas guide that went pretty damn in depth, unfortunately it seems like I was just before this little wave of Sylas's new rune page. Right now, players in Korea are finding a lot of success by taking fleet footwork with presence of mind, tenacity, last stand, biscuits, and cosmic insight, with double adaptive and either armor or MR in their minor runes depending on their matchup. They're also taking flash teleport as well, and all of this does make sense because in reality, the main weak point for Sylas is his early game. While yeah, he does have power spikes at level 3 and even level 2 as well as level 6, it's nothing quite like when he gets a ton of items and levels in the later stages of the game. Having an additional tool in fleet footwork to get you through the laning phase in a healthier mana can help a lot. And it doesn't just get you sustained, it also will help your trades and even escaping bad scenarios, because the extra movement speed from the energized effect is really nice, and you also can't discount the extra healing in long extended fights. While it might not have the upfront impact or the direct healing potential of having Conqueror on Sylas, it makes him a lot more consistent. And on a champion who really shines the later you get into the game, having more consistency really does make a lot of sense. Because consistency is key here, they're also changing up the build just slightly, where they're going GLP instead of Ludens first. The extra range on the GLP plus its slow allows Sylas to have more reliable and better engages, and he can always choose to disengage with the slow as well if he needs to. And having this flexibility plus added consistency is just better than Ludens in the long run. From there, things are pretty standard, where you're going Sorkshoes into Zhonya's and then Rabadons. Now, at this point, things do switch up a little bit here as well, because players are going for Lichbane as a damage item that also gives them 40% CDR. But the one way that about half of the players in Korea are working around this is by going Lucidity Boots instead of Sorkshoes. So if you go for those, you don't actually need to go Lichbane here, and can instead immediately go for a Void Staff, and then as a last item, get something either more damage like Liandry's, or go for something more utility-based, like a Banshee's Veil or maybe even a Spirit Visage, who knows what you might need. With Sylas wrapped up, next up let's talk about Swain. And for Swain in particular, this build works in top, mid, and in support as well as the AD carry position, where you aren't really playing an AD carry, you're playing an AP carry in the bot lane, but that's been pretty common for quite some time now. With the new changes to Swain, his potential at level 9 really is crazy. With a 3-second cooldown on his Q before any cooldown reduction, he really does just have the ability to chain gun through multiple people, might I add, because they made each of his lightning bolts on his Q go through enemies now. At the same time, this does mean that sometimes you do want to get into the face of danger, which is why the runes and the items have changed around a bit. You're looking at Conqueror with Presence of Mind, Tenacity, Last Stand, Nimbus Cloak, and Transcendence, with CDR, Adaptive, and either Armor or MR in your minor runes. These players are taking Flash Teleport if they're in solo lanes, while if they're in support, they usually end up taking Flash Ignite. And if you actually happen to be taking him into the bot lane as an AD carry role, then you're likely taking Flash and Heal. With Conqueror having more tenacity, the ability to deal more damage at low health, and good cooldown reduction and mobility through other runes, it really does help this new Swain have a better time overall and really take out the people who try and dive on top of him, and also catch up to the people who run away. In terms of items, these players are going Rod of Ages into Sorkshoes and then Zhonya's, followed by Liandry's. This core really makes Swain tanky and do a lot of damage. The only thing you're really missing at that point is magic resist, But if that's the case, usually Swain doesn't need to worry about them because he already has tools to deal with most people who do magic damage. Once you've got yourself a Liandry's, then you could go for that Rabadon's and Void Staff to wrap things up and do the most damage possible as a 2-item finishing combo. If you do simply just need more survivability and you don't actually need magic penetration, then items that can really help Swain survive more would be something like a Spirit Visage, where he gets the ability to heal a lot more even though he already has quite a bit. And just about any resistance item could also work on Swain as well, so keep that in mind. Next up, we're talking about Galio, and this build in particular is for mid Galio only. While yeah, I guess you could fit it into top lane, it really doesn't get played much in Korea, and I think it's for a pretty good reason, because you're going to get slapped around really easily when you don't have Aftershock. And that's because these players are taking Predator with Sudden Impact, Eyeball Collection, Ultimate Hunter, Nimbus Cloak, and Transcendence with double adaptive and MR in their minor runes. The advantage to having these runes and Flash and Teleport is that you still maintain the fact that Galio has pretty decent laning. His damage is still all there, and the only thing that you don't have are insane resistances, so you no longer just auto-win any trade that you manage to CC somebody in. What you gain instead is the ability to catch out almost anybody and show up to fights early on before you even have your ultimate. Because the extra utility of Predator, while not really bringing any extra damage, really makes Galio a huge threat. His usual weakness is kiting, and the only way he normally has a way to address that is by using his E properly. But now, by having Predator, you can instead save your E and commit it for damage. And let's face it, getting Shoryuken into the air is gonna hurt just about no matter what. While in general this Galio is going to be more squishy than his other counterparts, it doesn't mean that he's so squishy that you aren't going to be able to survive things. And you could tell because these players aren't afraid to itemize by going Proto Belt with Swifties right afterwards, showing that they don't really need Merc Treads or Tabby in most scenarios, and most of the time they actually even skip out on Sork Shoes, going for Swifties instead. It's very clear that they're going for as much mobility as they can possibly get in order to make sure that they can't get countered by slows and to really get every last drop out of their mobility for catching people with W. After your boots, you're looking at Zanya's, Rabadon's, Void Staff, Banshees, which is a very standard wrap-up for Galio. He uses all of these items really well, and considering that you aren't taking out any of your AP itemization and actually gaining a little bit of ability power because now you have runes that give you adaptive force, it might hit a bit harder than you're actually expecting. If your team doesn't need more damage and they really just need utility and tankiness, then this obviously isn't really the Galio build that you want to be looking for, because something taking Aftershock would simply be way better in that case. Predator Galio is more when you're looking at needing aggression and needing to run at the enemy team. Keep that in mind. Next champion doesn't actually have us leaving the mid lane, as right now I'm going to be talking about Twisted Fate. And Twisted Fate does sometimes get played elsewhere other than mid, but it's not enough to the point where I see any statistics of players actually taking this in other lanes. Players in Korea have kind of been, let's say, revisiting what TF kind of used to be a long time ago, back when Thunderlords was a thing, before Electrocute even existed, before Runes Reforged actually came around. These players are going for Electrocute with Taste of Blood, Ghost Poro, Ravenous Hunter, Minion Dematerializer, and Time Warp Tonic with attack speed, adaptive, and armor in their minor runes. Keep in mind that if you are going up against only magic damage, magic resist would obviously be better. And they are taking Flash Teleport, which actually every single champion on this list is taking Flash Teleport. That might be a little bit of a hint that Teleport is kinda good, even though it did get nerfed recently. Anyways, back to TF. This build really focuses on getting strong trades on TF, playing around your Electrocute every time it's off cooldown. This definitely has more lane presence than any other Twisted Fate build, and especially more so than the ones that go for Unsealed Spellbook, where they basically don't have a keystone for the first 5 minutes of the game. Having Electrocute can actually get you some solo kills without even having Ignite, and if you did choose to take Ignite, then you could potentially get even more, and it might be the tipping point if you are in a truly dangerous matchup. That's one of the reasons why this takes Taste of Blood and Ravenous Hunter, to make sure that every trade you're taking, you should be sustaining a respectable amount in. And if you ever really get put into a bad spot, Minion Dematerializer can save you by organizing a better recall and better position for the minion wave. As far as the items go for this build, it really is just like classic TF from a couple of years ago. Players are once again going for full AP, kinda 20-minute power spike TF, where you're looking at Rod of Asia's first item and then immediately into Sork Shoes. However, some players are opting for defensive boots And it's worth noting that defensive boots are still doing as well as sword shoes. Even Swifty boots have a place on TF, as it seems like they are also matching the defensive boots and sword shoes for performance. So it really is a matter of your ability to identify which one is the correct one to buy. Afterwards, they're going straight into Lich Bane, not even caring about Zhonya's, as it seems like the ability to have Electrocute and better dominate the lane puts people into a position where TF doesn't need to feel like he's threatened enough to worry about a Zhonya's as a second item. However, they are going for it third, and then following that up with Rabadons into Void Staff to complete their build. This is a really solid high AP damage TF build that used to be around for a while, but as he got a little bit weaker and things were changed around, people started feeling like they had to go Zhonya's, they had to go Comet or Airy and just focus on poking, and this seems to be the exact opposite of that. It'll be interesting to see how this performs over the patch and if it actually becomes more popular than Unsealed Spellbook TF. The very last champion that I'm going over is a top laner, and I guess, technically, you could play him with this build in mid, but I really wouldn't recommend it because that might get you reported. I'm talking about Skarner. And due to the recent Skarner changes, there's been a pretty big shift in how he's played, and he's actually not even really played that much in the jungle anymore. And like I said earlier, we're going to be talking about him in the top lane. And these players in Korea are taking Phase Rush on Skarner with Nimbus Cloak, Transcendence, Water Walking, Biscuits, and Cosmic Insight, as well as attack speed and double armor or double magic resist in their minor runes with Flash and Teleport. Right away you can tell that this is all focused around utility. You don't have any defensive or really offensive abilities here in your runes other than maybe the Nimbus Cloak movement speed whenever you burn a summoner spell. Phase Rush in particular can be really effective on Skarner because if you hit somebody with your E and go in and proc the auto attack and use a Q, you can just instantly proc your Phase Rush and disengage from them. And because you have the ability to disengage without using your W, you can use your W on the way in to mitigate whatever damage they happen to be trying to do to you in the middle of the trade. This build really seems to be trying to abuse that as much as possible while also focusing on becoming a tanky and really irritating Scorpion the later the game goes on. These players are rushing an Iceborne Gauntlet immediately into Merc Treads or Tabbies depending on what they're going up against on the enemy team. And right afterwards, they're not pulling any punches, they're going straight up tank. Adaptive Helm is the next most common finish item on him here. And by having 30% cooldown reduction and 40% if you're at level 10, you're looking at a really annoying Skarner build, where you have constant W shielding, constant E stuns, low cooldown ultis for catch potential, and, percentage health damage on your Q that always is coming up. While at that point you might feel pretty unstoppable in a one-on-one unless the enemy has a bunch of healing, in which case you should have gone to Bramblefest, then you could simply go for health, because the only thing stopping a Skarner is not having enough health to survive and get the rest of their cooldowns off. These players are going Warmogs and then going for even more engage potential by getting a Righteous Glory. And then many times they are up against champions who need sustain, so finishing a Thornmail at the very end is common on Skarner. And with that, that's all the Korean builds I have for you on patch 10.16. To find guides that get to go super in-depth, unlike what we can do here on YouTube, make sure you go check out our website, GameLeap.com, where we have guides that are all done by challenger level players. It's really a no-brainer if your goal is to improve at League. And to give you an example right off the bat, we have guides on several of the champions I went over today. But we also have more generic guides that don't even focus on champions, but rather go over lanes and jungle tactics that you need to understand in order to be better at League. And as always, my name is Ace Windstorm, and I will see you all later.